China is the leading emitter of CO2 emissions. It's responsible for nearly 30% of total global emissions. But it's also a large part of the solution because China is leading the global clean energy revolution. I'm Barbara Finamore, and I am the author of a book entitled, Will China Save the Planet? The reason why China is the world's leading emitter is basically coal. China has relied on coal to power its economic miracle. And in the decade following its entry into the World Trade Organization, China quadrupled its GDP, it nearly quintupled its exports, and it tripled its coal consumption. So coal is if coal consumption were a country, coal consumption in China, it would be the leading emitter. It would have more emissions than any other country other than China itself. Starting about 10 years ago, the Chinese government began to realize that its development model, powered by coal, focused on heavy industry and exports, was unsustainable and was leaving a trail of environmental devastation in its wake. This came to a head in 2013, the year of the air apocalypse, when public concern about air pollution and levels of PM 2.5, the most dangerous pollutant, got so high that 4,000 people were dying every day. The government realized it had to find a new way to move forward, and that's when it began a whole series of efforts to cut its coal consumption. Beginning with a new air pollution control and action plan in 2013 that was focused on cutting coal in the most polluted regions, China has instituted a whole raft of measures to cut coal consumption, cap coal consumption nationally, put new efficiency standards on its coal-fired power plants and heavy industry, launched what may become the world's largest carbon trading system, and so forth. These have had quite an effect because after growing by double digits for over a decade, coal use was flat in 2013, and for the next 3 years, it continued to drop. And this is important because during those years, largely as a result of China's efforts, global CO2 emissions stabilized, even as the world economy continued to grow. It's not just that China is saying no to coal, it's also saying yes to renewable energy, and not just in its rhetoric, but with big money. China has overtaken the rest of the world in investments in renewable energy. They've put in more than the US and the EU put together. And China's now the leading producer and consumer and exporter and generator of solar and wind power. One of the key messages we have been bringing to China for over 25 years is that there isn't a conflict between environmental protection and economic development. And we always hold up the example of California. California, the 5th largest economy in the world, has managed to keep its per capita energy use flat since the early 70s while continuing to grow its economy. China is very interested in learning more about that and has done a lot to adapt and adopt California's innovative policies for its own. China has undergone a remarkable transition in another way, from climate change resistor in the international negotiations to advocate of global environmental governance. And it's interesting to me that the principles that China has applied to those negotiations have really not changed in all these years. They continue to put their own national interest first and protecting their national sovereignty and enhancing their international image. But what changed between Copenhagen and Paris is China's definition of its own national interest. It understood that tackling climate change is an engine for their future sustainable economic growth.